How could a simple knock on the wrong door turn a lifelong social worker into a victim of unimaginable violence? Maria Coto, 56, spent her life helping others, walking into the homes of those in need. Yet on one ordinary May afternoon in 2024, the door she knocked on wasn't a plea for help, it was a trap. In just minutes, her world would explode into chaos. A man she had never met, fueled by rage, turned a quiet visit into a brutal nightmare. Punches, kicks, a fight for her life in a place that should have been safe. By the time help arrived, the woman who dedicated her life to protecting others was fighting for her own survival. And the story doesn't end there. Stay with us, because what happened next will shock you and reveal the terrifying truth about one wrong turn in the wrong place at the wrong time. She arrived before dawn, as she often did. The cold air gently brushing the skin beneath her coat, the quiet hum of the morning commute. She tucked a few files under her arm, glanced at the calendar. One more day, one more week, until she'd reached another milestone in her long years of service. This was a familiar rhythm for her, a rhythm of helping, of meeting people where they were, of lending a hand and a heart. Her name was Maria. For many, she was the friendly voice on the other end of the line, the person who came through when life felt uncertain. For her colleagues, she was more. A little spark of laughter at 4 in the afternoon, a light-hearted song she'd softly hum at her desk, the kind of person who made others feel seen. Her work at the social services office had spanned years. Every case, every visit built a patchwork of stories she carried in her heart. She believed in the dignity of each person, in the possibility of change, in the idea that when one reaches out, something shifts. In the modest apartment building on South Street in Peekskill, New York, she stepped into her role that Thursday afternoon. She was performing the job she had trained for, accepting the imperfection of the world and choosing to walk into it anyway. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But in her mind and in her heart, she was doing something meaningful. She took her time preparing. She reviewed the client's file. She made a mental note of the address, of the person she was going to meet, of the questions she would ask. She reminded herself, arrive, listen, empathize, assist. In her car, she put on a soft smile for the mirror, adjusted a strand of hair, paused a moment of gratitude for being able to contribute. She was doing what she loved. As she entered the building that afternoon, the lights slanted softly through the windows, the hum of distant traffic, the faint smell of coffee from a nearby cafe, the hush of a place where people live their lives, some quietly, some with struggle, some with hope. She knocked on the door. She raised her hand. She hoped to find a familiar face, maybe one in need of support, but one she could help. Safe, routine, predictable, a little mundane, perhaps, but steady. The kind of day you trust will unfold, that you have managed many times before. She believed in making small differences, one visit at a time. She believed in people. But that afternoon, something changed. In a heartbeat, the familiar cracked. She knocked on the door, only it wasn't quite the one she intended. A little misstep in her map, a slight misreading of the number. She was at the wrong door. It should have been a moment of embarrassment, a small apology, a redirection. Instead, a man answered, a man not expecting a visitation from a social worker. A man whose door she had inadvertently knocked on. In his uncle's apartment, or what she thought likely was the right unit, she stood, holding her briefcase, her papers, unsure. The man opened. And what followed was far beyond any normal disruption. It began with words. Harsh words. His mind not fully settled. Confusion. Accusations. Fear. She raised her voice. I'm sorry before the first punch landed. The first blow to the face. The shock of impact. Her breath catching. Her heart pounding, not for the fear of the job she did, but for the unexpected violence now in her world. He chased her into a neighboring apartment. She fled. She called 911, her voice trembling, barely audible. But he followed. He kicked her repeatedly, heavy boots merciless. Her head smashed against unforgiving floors, her mind reeling. She heard the words, I want to kill you, he yelled. He struck again. And then the darkness began to swallow her world. She had dedicated her work to helping others. Now she was the one needing help. Her body broken, her brain swelling, her life hanging by a thread. The mundanity of that afternoon, the routine visit, the paperwork, the lunch plans with her friend had dissolved. The world she trusted collapsed under the weight of one wrong door, one wrong moment. In the hospital, machines beeped. A ventilator breathed for her. Her colleagues hovered in disbelief. They remembered her song at 4 in the afternoon, her laughter, her kindness. She was so full of life, they said. They comforted each other with memories as conflicted sorrow filled the hallways. She had dreamed of retirement not far away. She had spoken of travel, of returning to roots in El Salvador, of coffee and family. And now the future she had envisioned was slipping away. People whisper of how small she was, petite at 4 feet 8 inches heels, but mighty in spirit. They remembered how she would dress in designer coats, how she would treat every person like they were deserving of dignity. They remembered she gave her personal cell number to a struggling mother, telling her to call if she needed anything. That generosity made her vulnerable. She willingly stepped into homes, into unknowns, with compassion and trust. But what trust had she placed in a system that offered little protection? What morality had she held on to, believing that kindness would fend off harm? The attacker, a young man stepping into his uncle's door by chance, his mind clouded, his response violent, he became the instrument of that failure. From his side, fear, confusion, maybe substance influence, aggression. He believed he was being threatened. He reacted with overwhelming force. The moral lines blurred, the man who needed help, the social worker who gave it, the moment where service met danger. Her story became a statement. Even the most humble, self-sacrificing person can be thrust into violence without warning. It raised the question, in a world where we go into others' spaces to help, what safeguards exist to protect both sides? She walked into that door not anticipating it would become a battlefield. Her memory didn't just become a tragedy. It became a mirror. In the wake of her death, the department changed. The union rallied. Vigils held. Candles lit. Outside the county building, colleagues in pink gathered her favorite color, remembering her warmth and life. They said she was murdered while doing her job trying to help the less fortunate. Her life ended at 56 after decades of service, right before she could rest, right before she could fulfill the travel dream she had. And in that ending, her beginning shines brighter, the person she was and the legacy she left. People now ask, what would Maria do? She would insist we see one another with dignity. She would ask us to step into the world with humble courage. She would say, help when you can, listen when you're able, and don't walk away from what's hard because that's where hope lives. Her transformation is subtle, not in a triumphant spotlight, but in the echo of the change she sparked. Her death forced the system to examine safety for those who serve. Her life forced a community to remember compassion as a virtue, not just a job. She became a symbol not because she asked for it, but because her actions embodied something greater than herself. This story leaves us with this. Kindness is not without risk, yet we carry it anyway. Service is not safe, but we dignify it anyway. To step into someone else's world is to open our own. To believe in people is to risk being hurt, but perhaps that's still worth it. Maria's story invites us to pause and consider how we treat those who do the work of helping. It invites us to examine how we approach moments that seem routine, because we never know which of them will shift everything. And most of all, it invites us to ask, when we knock on doors in our own lives, metaphorically or literally, are we ready for what answers we may receive? She taught us that life is fragile, work is meaningful, and moments matter. And though the worst happened to her, her echo continues in the doors we open for others, in the compassion we show, in the courage to keep reaching out even when we feel uncertain. If you feel something now, if her story moved you, then let that feeling become action. Look around you. Who needs you to knock on their door? Who needs you to simply say, I'm here? If this story touched you, if it made you pause, then be part of the conversation. Share the video. Subscribe for more stories that matter. And next time you hesitate at a door, literal or metaphorical, remember Maria and step forward anyway.